Thank you for joining us today. We're looking at the second half of the book of James. We started our study of that yesterday, and we found that our key word is works, because works demonstrate our faith. It doesn't give us salvation, but it's evidence of our salvation. And people see our faith by the works that we are able to show, and how the Lord has changed our life. So our key word then is works, and our key verse is 1:22. But also many people have compared the book of James to the book of Proverbs. The book of Proverbs is about wisdom, if you recall, and the book of James seems to cover up that same material, and it's the wisdom book of the New Testament in many ways. Very, very practical book, and deals with a lot of subjects that we could spend a lot of time on if we had the opportunity. But the book begins with wisdom, as you recall yesterday. Verse 5 says, "But if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God." And so it wants us to know that we have a need for wisdom, and God is able and willing and desires to give us wisdom as we call upon him, especially in the context here of trials. But when we go over to chapter 3, we find in verses 13 on down, he begins to talk intensely about wisdom. And what he wants to do here is show us that there are two different kinds of wisdom. And so let's take a real quick look at that. In verses 14, look at verse 13, chapter 3. "Who among you is wise and understanding? Let him show by his good behavior his deeds in the gentleness of wisdom." So he combines the issue of good works, good deeds, and wisdom here. Then he talks about a kind of wisdom that we don't want. It's in verses 14 all the way down through 16. He says this, "But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not be arrogant and so lie against the truth. This wisdom is not that which comes down from above, but is earthly, natural, demonic." So let's stop there for a moment. He's talking about a natural wisdom, just a worldly wisdom, an earthly wisdom, and he calls it demonic. And so the sources of this kind of wisdom are certainly not God. The sources that he gives here are everything from just our natural life to the way the world thinks, to the way the demons lead us in their doctrines. And so this is not a wisdom, of course, that any Christian would want. He goes on to say, "For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there is disorder in every evil thing." So he's talked earlier in verse 14 about some of the characteristics of this natural demonic wisdom, and he says they're bitter jealousy and selfish ambition. And so much of the world flows around jealousy and ambition, selfishness. And he says that is not from God, it's from demonic or natural sources. And the outworking of that, he says, is disorder and every evil thing. The word disorder, interesting, is translated in 1:8 as unstable, and in 3:8 is restless. And so an earthly, natural, demonic wisdom leads to a very disoriented and unstable life. Why is it that so many people are out of balance in life? Why can't they get traction and move forward and live as God wants them to live? Well, it's because they're being led by a wisdom that does not come from God. And so James warns us that that is the case. But then he moves on to another kind of wisdom, a wisdom that comes from above, he says in verse 17, which is first pure, then peaceable and gentle and reasonable, full of mercy, good fruits, unwavering, without hypocrisy. So he gives us some of the characteristics of this godly wisdom, a wisdom that comes from above. He's not exhausting the list. This list is very similar to the fruit of the Spirit that we find in Galatians chapter 5 and in the book of Ephesians and other places. None of these are exhaustive, but it gives us demonstrations of the kind of character that the Spirit of God creates in us, and the kind of character that the wisdom of God creates in us. And so as we look at our own lives, we can tell what kind of wisdom is dominating by what it's producing. Is it producing this disorder and every evil thing? Or is it producing the fruit of the Spirit and the things outlined in verse 17? But he goes on in verse 18 and said, "And the seed whose fruit is righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace." So the outworking then of this heavenly wisdom from God is peace. And so instead of being at war with one another, he's going to talk about that, by the way, in chapter 4, where we have all this conflict with people and we go to war with people, that's demonic wisdom. That's natural wisdom. But he says here the wisdom from above, the kind of wisdom that God gives us, is not like that at all. Instead, it's a wisdom that leads to peace. Peace within ourselves, peace with our God, and peace with other people. And that's how God would have us live, with the wisdom that is from above. James is very practical. And you can look at the rest of the chapters here, the rest of the verses, and see how this wisdom is applicable to every area of life. I encourage you to do that. It'll give you a wonderful day in the Lord if you do. We'll catch you next time.